special thank you for coming on a Friday morning, so thank you for joining the panel today. The panel you've come to is called The Internet of Health, and certainly a hearty welcome. It's sponsored by Stockholm University, Swedish Law and Research Institute, Erie. So again, thank you. I must say I'm very excited to be here today. It's been, the last few days very thought-provoking for me. I come from the private sector. I work for a very, very large tech service company. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Infosys, but I lead their AI and automation practice for Infosys. And I'll tell you, unfortunately, ethics and the legal ramifications of AI is very rarely spoken about. Although on the flip side, usually my deals fall apart because of privacy data concerns. So it's sort of a weird imbalance between the two. I think today you're going to be really fascinated by the panel we have. We have folks that are across the board, really focusing on ethics, legality, as well as practical application of AI within the healthcare sector. So quickly, I'd like to give a quick intro for our panelists. We have Barbara Pierscionek. Barbara has qualifications and expertise in clinical research, science, law, and ethics. She is an EU Commission expert in ethics, has published and awarded grants in healthcare, ethics, and applications to technology. You have Professor Cecilia Magnusson Sjöberg. Cecilia defended her doctoral thesis about automatic legal decision-making back in 1992 and have continued the fight since then and has been working with the interplay of law and IT both nationally, internationally, and for the Swedish government. You have Magnus Stenbeck, an epidemiologist and social scientist, currently associated professor at the Karolinska Institute of Sweden. He has extensive experience working with Swedish, Nordic, and European authorities with the goal to create sustainable technical and legal platform to use information in Swedish population-wide health, clinical and demographic registries in research and statistics. And Francisco Florez, a PhD in computer engineering, member of Dominics and Ambient Intelligence Research Group at the Universidad of Alicante, currently working on research for smart homes and technologies to support independent living for the elderly. So with that, I'll start with the panel, just so you know how the discussion will go. Each presenter will go up and present for about 10 to 15 minutes, their point of view, and then we'll leave time for a very active discussion and Q&A afterwards. So with that, I'd like to start and introduce Barbara.
First of all, can you all hear me? Right. Thank you for inviting me to this, and I wanted to set the scene. This is about the Internet of Health, so let's set the scene about what are our greatest challenges in health. Now, I've put this from an EU perspective, but actually it's global. One of the first things that we need to think about are that there are tiny microbes that are becoming more and more resistant, multi-resistant bacteria, and are spreading. And this is not just to think about what is going on in China at the moment. These things can have strange transmission ways, modalities. So we have a situation in the Netherlands where Clostridium difficile has been eradicated, and in nearby Germany it still exists. We have situations across Africa, across Australia, used to live in Australia, and you cannot really police this. We've overprescribed antibiotics, and now these things are getting back at us. We need big data, we need technology to help us alleviate that. We have quality and safety of healthcare products to look at. We look at drugs that we've prescribed and we think are tried and true, like blood pressure drugs, and then we have a situation where known blood pressure drugs have caused cancer-based impurities because the manufacturing process has changed. In 2014, the Democratic Republic of Congo had anti-malaria drugs, which ended up killing people because there were antipsychotic impurities in there. And these are tried and tested medications. We have healthcare systems we want to harmonize if we're going to use big data, and yet We still don't have, even across the European Union, proper structurally institutionalized methods for patient safety. They vary enormously. We don't have harmonized databases. We don't have harmonized systems, and that's just across the EU. Globally, it's an even bigger challenge. And then, of course, we have an aging population. People are living longer. People are maintained and not cured. Hence, we have the crisis with obesity. We have then the manifestations of that, diabetes, and so on and so on. So people are going to live longer, and they're going to be sicker, and they're going to want independent lifestyles. Mental health is on the increase. Mental health issues are on the increase. How do we deal with that? And then there is this hesitancy towards vaccines. That sets the scene, and it's not a particularly nice one. So what do we look to? We look to technology. We look to the new innovations. We look to how they're going to help. And I want to start at the very bottom here. We have inequalities already. What we don't want is for these technological innovations to exacerbate the inequalities. We want to reduce the inequalities. But actually, there is a risk all the way through when you're implementing them that you are increasing the inequalities. I don't think we fully understand them. And I think what we do need in our interdisciplinary teams are health economists. I don't know whether there are any here, but you are critical in all of these innovations and implementing them. So we have digital health, we have AI, we have cybersecurity, we have blockchain and quantum and all these things that promise us a better use of big data, patients have better access, it will be secure, and so on and so on. Will it? I don't know, I'm not a blockchain specialist, but I just wonder. Personalization of healthcare. So big data is a marvelous thing. I think it's a wonderful thing because we will be able to look at huge cohorts and we'll be able to extract more important data than we would in smaller groups. And yet we talk about personalization. How can you personalize when you've aggregated? Another challenge. And then, of course, the increased security that is needed. And the problems, and this is where I'm not having a go at private sector, but I guess in academia we're a little bit fearful of what commercialization might mean. Perhaps we haven't quite grasped it. And whether there will be players in the tech care arena who will be out for profit-making alone. And will it be secure under them? I don't know. And these are the fundamental ethical principles that we need to consider. Now, these go back, most of them, to the Hippocratic Oath. The first one, confidentiality, doctors still swear to now. The original, although I haven't got the Greek translation, the Greek original, but I have the translation, is I will maintain the patient data even after they have died in secrecy. Then we have the respect for autonomy. That doesn't just mean that we recognize the person's right to a decision. We respect their decision. We respect their decision about healthcare. Of course, they have to be autonomous adults at a certain age. Have we fully grasped what is an autonomous adult? When in England we have something called Gillick competency. So at 16 you can make a decision about your health if a doctor deems you to be competent enough. It's a common law principle, not a parliamentary principle. But it exists. Justice in provision of resources and treatment. Is it just at the moment? No, it's not. Of course it's not. Is it going to be more just with technological advances? We hope so. And the avoidance of harm and risk and the doing of good. So non-maleficence and beneficence. You always must aim to do good. When I was a clinician, I was told the patient that comes into your practice must come out at least the same or better off and not much worse off. And so that applies to everything. Whatever we do ought to be for the benefit and for the betterment. And therefore we have to avoid risks. And that is a very, very tough balance. And underlying all of this is a recognition that the patient, the participant, the subject is in a vulnerable position. So when we sit on ethics committees, and God knows I've sat on enough of these and overseen enough applications and so on to know that we have this tick list and we check it through. Have you got your information sheets? Has the participant, subject, patient consented? Have they been fully informed? Well, you don't really know that. You put a sheet under their noses, you hope they've read it and they've ticked it. Have they been fully informed? Privacy, confidentiality. The use of research data, this is a tough one because you try to maximize your use of research data, but you also have to minimize that you don't exploit it, and that's another balance. And the treatment options, to do good, to avoid risk, but also to respect the autonomy, because a treatment option that a doctor might want is not particularly, or the doctor might recommend, it may not be the one that the patient wants. And there has to be an implicit understanding all the way through. And I'm maybe harping on a little bit about this, but this is about the vulnerability aspect. The patient, the data subject, is in a vulnerable position and needs to know, always needs to know what is going on. So we come to data sharing and data mining and the ethics behind that. And I'm not quite sure that data mining ethics is about ethics all the time. A lot of it's about law. A lot of it's about security, storage. It follows the data protection principles, and that's good. But I think we need to think here about anticipatory technology ethics. Ethics has to some extent, anticipate what may be happening with big data, but it cannot be so speculative that it goes into the realm of fantasy. And that's tough as well, another balance. And AI and robots. Now, these are already in existence, and they are growing, and there will be robotic carers, and there are already robotic carers, and machine learning and all the rest of it. And this is something in which I don't have a great understanding, but I do profess in having a little bit of a fear, because when you don't understand something, you are vulnerable, you are fearful. And I just wonder, if we have robots, and we will need them because the population's aging, there aren't enough young people to look after the people who are older and will be chronically ill. If we do have robots caring, how much of my autonomy am I handing to a machine? And do I need it all? And does the machine know better? And there is a tendency to think that perhaps the machine knows better. You also cannot argue with it. It doesn't have the emotions. You may argue with a carer, particularly a family member, but you may not argue with a machine. Does that make you even more vulnerable? Monitoring and surveillance. Again, something which is very important, and my colleague Paco will be talking about that and is an expert in this. But who is being monitored and who is being surveyed? It's important to have these devices, but if I have a device, I'm old, I'm 88 years old, I want to be at home, I want to have that individual perspective on my life, I don't want to be in a home, but I need to be watched. And my child is watching me at a remote distance. How do I know that somebody else isn't passing by and looking in and seeing something? How do I know that? If you're being surveyed or monitored, you don't know exactly who's looking at that. So again, it comes back to the ethical issues. How confidential is it? How good is it for me? What is the risk-benefit balance? Am I being dependent on someone, or am I independent, or is it really a very paternalistic, perhaps even voyeuristic method of managing me and my health? And finally, is it just provision? Will everybody have access to this sort of surveillance and help or not? And will policy be national, local, global? And I wanted to conclude with, I think these are fairly poignant remarks which resonated with me. Health is essential for economic growth. It seems almost an obvious one, but it underpins our economic growth. We say technology does, actually good health does. And if we are going to put AI, robots, big data at the core of it, then we need to think about safety and a safe provision to make sure that that economic growth is really supporting health. Economic growth is also essential for health. The WHO has made a very interesting remark that we need a multi-sectoral framework, but that health is a public priority, and actually health is an investment. It's not a cost or a burden, it is an investment, and done properly, it will reap great rewards. But it must take into account technology. And finally, and most importantly, we need far more public education. We need public health system that will educate people in what is already here, many don't know about, and what is about to come to us. So a little bit of speculation, but certainly education, and to get that buy-in from the public, because we are all the public. And we are all important in keeping our economies, our populations, and our world safe and secure.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. I know certainly later I'd like to delve deeper into your comments around needing to anticipate ethics and really considering vulnerability. So please, Cecilia.
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I'd like to express my thanks for having the possibility of taking an active part in this very exciting conference. What strikes me when working in the context of research and development, including health data and artificial intelligence, is that there is a need for making more precise what is meant by ethical and legal issues. Quite often in large projects, commercial, public sector oriented, there are advisory boards, internal advisory boards, external advisory boards that are supposed to evaluate the ethical and legal issues. I'm not an ethical expert, but I do work quite a lot with the law, and one major message during my brief presentation is that law, legal aspects are much more than merely legislation, regulation. And that becomes also clear when we look at, well, the topic area that I work with at Stockholm University. Being a professor of law and informatics means that I work with substantive IT law issues, interpreting, applying legal rules in digital context, but also how to include, integrate legal aspects at early stages of system design, development, implementation, and management. And as a matter of fact, the most critical factors take place in the intersection, I would say, between conventional legal work and legal system design, embedding law, and doing that proactively, consider the legal aspects related to a certain system design, e-health, health project. Doing that proactively is also a critical factor, so as not merely calling for the lawyers, the legal expertise, when things have already gone wrong. So what we do within the field of law and informatics, and I can see some colleagues in the audience, is to enhance that there are two perspectives, the substantive law ones, the methodological ones, and that applies also to health application. And at the same time, it's not as if it's clear-cut how to choose the most important legal issues. Health, AI, it's complicated, and from a methodological point of view, what you do need is an interdisciplinary approach, or interdisciplinary approaches rather, and at the same time multidisciplinary work, bridging over gaps from medical law, public law, commercial law, intellectual property rights, for example. So it is a complicated field, but no surprise. I think it's also been very interesting, those comments that have been made with regard to the GDPR and automatic individual decision-making, in particular Article 22 in the GDPR, and the fact that we're still struggling with vagueness, or rather the ambiguities of that article, not least in terms of the heading itself. Is it all about automation? To what extent does it include artificial intelligence? And how on earth are controllers to be able to explain the meaningful, explain the underlying logic in a meaningful way to the data subjects when applying AI-based solutions in terms of machine learning ones, where there is a component of black box. So there is a true challenge. I have initially referred to research projects and development projects, development work, and just to share with you a few notes about a typical, I would say, project as of today. It's the acronym, every project should have an acronym. We have data leash, meaning learning and sharing under privacy constraints. It's a cooperative, collaborating project between the Royal High School of Technology, KTH, in Stockholm, and the Stockholm University, the Department of Computer Science, and also the Swedish Law and Informatics Research Institute. And here what we are addressing very briefly is questions that has to do with the lack of guidelines and technical specifications of what kind of privacy leakage is acceptable, currently prevents that data is exploited and shared to the full extent possible. Of course, that explanation might be considered as provocative in itself, but to some extent you need to express what you are intending to do. And furthermore, within the data lease project, the basis is quite a large volume of health data, patient records, that it serves as a basis for the investigations of health in digital contexts and the whole complex of questions related to privacy in an AI-based context. Now, it's not, I would like to emphasize that it is not a clear-cut what is traditional modern information communication technologies and what is AI. Personally, I think there is a kind of a gliding scale, and it's not possible probably to define the borderlines. And I should also mention that this project approach involving so many records, including very sensitive data, it has been ethically reviewed, and it is permitted what's done. And that is, of course, very important, that the ethical component is very important in this context. And whoops, that is, yes. Right. And in this data leash project and in sub-working packages, it becomes quite clear that you need to categorize, you need to organize what is truly meant by AI in the health sector. And there are, from a legal point of view, there are differences between whether you design AI-based systems for the purpose of diagnosis, more information-oriented AI-based support, as opposed to the legal frameworks surrounding, for instance, physical objects in terms of sensors. And furthermore, I mean, we are focusing very much on privacy as one overarching value, and also transparency. And I think there is work to be done in that context. Oh, time is
no,
time is not done. That we need to investigate further into privacy, of course, but not least transparency. In the context of research, you could have transparency with regard to the research, but furthermore, transparency in regard to the actual personal data processing based on AI-based methods. There are lots of challenges in terms of the machine learning approach, self-improving algorithms, dynamic algorithms. So one way of putting this, and I think this is more of an exercise than something striving for a legal definition, but just to express in words the complicated varieties of very important concepts. One way of putting it, I would say, is that the data subject's right to transparency is indeed a condition for privacy in the context of personal data processing based on AI methods. And more importantly, you might be designing your systems in a public environment, in private environment, that to a varying extent is governed by openness, but that might not be good enough, because although your organization and the overall responsibility for designing different applications are governed by openness, that is not similar that principle will really be implemented due to a lack of sufficient access rights that are not sufficiently implemented and managed adequately. So I think we still have some exercises, that's of course not a surprise. I mean, there's much work to be done. And what we are, I wouldn't say struggling with in the data leash project, but what we are concerned with and what we are putting our resources on is to have an explicit theoretical framework that do address such things as legal ontologies, also combined with taxonomies and designing conceptual models for handling those core critical factors such as what are more precisely the understanding what is anonymization, pseudonymization, de-identification, etc. And the different versions of consent, and not least personal data being ordinary personal data, sensitive personal data, and possibly integrity-sensitive data, different kinds of consent. Informed consent within the medical sector is not necessarily equivalent to the kind of consent that is dominating or characterized in GDPR. So there's a lot of work in analyzing those core concepts. And also one quite tricky issue has to do with the ownership versus control of personal data. From a legal point of view, it's quite challenging to discuss data management in terms of ownership. Ownership rather has to do with physical entities, not information as such. Maybe that must be changed, or ought to be changed. But right now, it's not that natural to talk about ownership of data, possibly more control. But that's the kind of issues that we are working with, not least in bridging over different professional profiles. And then again, what about fulfilling the information duties in the GDPR, information duties that the controller is supposed to fulfill on the controller's own regard, but also information duties due to the data service requests. And that complying with those rules can be very complicated, technically speaking. So maybe we are in search for some new professional roles, some kind of intermediary, some kind of legal tech interpreter. I mean, we do have interpreters when it comes to human languages. Maybe we need some interpreters with regard to personal data processing in order to comply, fulfill the requirements, the data protection requirements. And furthermore, in this project, in one of the pilot studies, we are working with legal assessments and management in an e-learning environment. And, well, it's kind of scary to say, but we are actually aiming for automated AI-based decision-making based on very, well, I wouldn't say anonymized data because it's so difficult, but really pseudonymized data. For the overall purpose of efficiency enhancement. And that is, of course, too bright to be a regulative purpose specification, but the overall goal is efficiency enhancement in an e-learning context. And also preserving privacy. And I think from a legal point of view, there are no shortcuts. You have to do the work. You have to carry out the data analysis from a legal point of view. But at the same time, we are very conventional in terms of dissemination of reports. We are working, outlining different kinds of publications. So from that point of view, there are no surprises. There is, for instance, one forthcoming report that addresses issues, I'm the author, e-health as an app, and how that relates to data protection and data sharing. And then you immediately run into issues of health issues. What is an app? Can you define it? Should you define it? Or rather not? And furthermore, there is another forthcoming publication that addresses issues concerning methods for more open data in medical settings. Is it at all possible, feasible to talk about open data in a medical environment? And then if you add AI, what does that imply? And then adding to the picture, the Swedish government has also quite. I was irresponsible, not irresponsible. I was responsible for the contents. I'm sorry. Addressing research databases, and I think here it's interesting to also listening to other contributions during the conferences. What about big data? Is that no longer topical? But of course it is. And what does that mean in terms of a more narrow understanding in terms of research databases? Very much of the research today, including health data, AI-oriented approaches are still relating to projects that are well defined. They begin and the end, there is a project manager. What about research databases and how to make those research databases in compliance with the GDPR, given the fact of data minimization, etc. So there is much more to be said, but I say thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Cecilia. I mean, I know there'll be a lot of food for thought around, what is health, and what are the interdisciplinary subjects to bring in, especially when you're thinking about AI. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Magnus?
Yes. Okay. I will talk about the concept of intelligence in this context. Really, what is needed in terms of intelligence in healthcare, and also the question of self-learning. Will a machine be able to learn the type of intelligence that we need in healthcare? So, my talk will deal primarily with how to use AI in individual healthcare, in the healthcare meeting with the patient, but also with the task of increasing knowledge and applying artificial intelligence in healthcare research, or health research, I should say. I'll try to show you some examples of how AI is in place now, and also try to ask about what kind of intelligence will be used, some questions about future possibilities in this field, and some questions about where do we really want to go. That is the ethical considerations here. So, starting with the AI and the individual healthcare process, we have instruments, AI support in all parts of these of the process here. In the initial contact and referral of a patient, in collecting and analyzing data, in setting a diagnosis, in recommending a treatment, maybe not in deciding treatment, and the question is, do we want that? But it could certainly be applied in the future to perform treatment, to follow up patients after treatment, to monitor patients in the home, for instance, aid self-care in the home. The National Board of Health and Welfare made an inventory in Sweden. Where do we use AI today? And it's in a number of specialties: radiology, cardiology, dermatology, pathology, ophthalmology, gastroenterology, lab analysis. Those are the fields where AI is used mostly today. And there is substantial research into other possibilities, and the development is going fast. Then how can AI support the healthcare workers here? Well, it will be able to provide perhaps a more efficient gateway into healthcare, to allocate requests to the correct address. It may help to increase care in taking care of patients in the primary care services and in outpatient care, and it will be able to perhaps improve the quality of that, thereby reducing costs and increasing speed, hopefully being able to reduce the care queue in that way. It provides different kinds of technical support, collecting, analyzing, and preserving data in an efficient manner. And it can improve the quality of treatment by better recommendations to decision makers, doctors, and others about treatment. So the most current common applications today then would be monitoring patients in the home. Patients can stay at home to a larger extent than they used to. Some examples here are heart failure patients, which can be monitored by sensors directly in contact with the hospital. Compliance of medicine, prescribed medicines in the home. Also monitoring accidental falls among the elderly by movement sensors and by cameras. Paco will show some nice examples of how that can be done in the future. Also, of course, the big use of AI today is analyzing images, X-rays, mammography, ultrasound, and images for looking at skin diseases, or at least in the fields of mammography and skin diseases. We can show that the machine is better at analyzing pictures today than the best humans. Mental health support is perhaps sometimes used and is an older application, although still somewhat experimental due to the ethical problems in using machines here. Remote doctor visits using cell phone apps is not AI, but it increases rapidly. People call the doctor, especially caregivers with young children want to call the doctor and have a direct doctor appointment over the phone. This can perhaps be replaced by machine consultations remotely. But if we do, we have to ask, is the quality of the person-to-machine communication sufficient? Is it, for instance, ethically okay to mimic a human when you have a remote consultation, perhaps without the person calling, knowing that I'm talking to a machine? Can the machine handle miscommunication? I didn't understand what the machine meant. They can't see me properly on the picture. Or the machine didn't understand my request. That has to be resolved. And we have to have a way out. How can I reach a real person? I must be aware that I'm talking to a machine. How can I reach a real person? Speed. The machine it's likely that the machine may be able to provide a quicker response to my requests and needs, then increasing, of course, patient satisfaction in that field. But do I, as a patient, have sufficient confidence in the medical competence of a machine? Okay, what can the machine learn in terms of the intelligence used in healthcare? What is really possible? What is needed and what is really possible? Perceptual skills. There I think the outlook is good. Visual, tactile, audiological, taste, smell. The machine can be taught to do this fairly well. Some of it remotely, other things obviously not remotely, but here we can use the AI. Decision-making is a more difficult field, of course, and here more controversial. Can the machine choose the best treatment? What lies behind the treatment recommendation? Does the machine make a correct assessment of risk versus benefit? Can it weigh long-term versus short-term consequences of a choice? Can it even consider individual contra collective harm and benefits in healthcare? Can it adapt to the legislation, suggest something that is legal, use your personal data in a legally acceptable way? And even more complicated, will it be able to understand and adapt to the social context within which it operates? Then, on the aggregate level, can the machine learn science, medical science, epidemiology? Well, simple tasks include data collection, efficient storage, remote access, authorization, efficient computation, We all have tools for that today. More advanced, when we're getting into causal analysis and inference in science. Can it make conclusions? Conclusions based on statistical evidence from statistical modeling, from text analysis, from visual inspection? And then can it aid in making a synthesis based on assessing existing old evidence and new evidence? It certainly can collect it efficiently, but can it make the synthesis? Can it write articles? We have seen some examples of computer-produced articles. Can it write research proposals, maybe? Impossible, question mark. Design study protocols. Choose analytical strategies. Prioritize among research questions, which are the most important ones to do. Can it review articles? Not only write, but review articles. Can it evaluate research proposals? Not only write them, but evaluate them. Can it make ethical and legal reviews? Those are types of intelligence involved in research, and to some extent, I think that AI will be used, but there are some limits, perhaps. Now, not what is possible, but what is desirable. What do we want the machine to do? The control problem, widely discussed. How much will the machine take over of the healthcare work? And what do we feel is acceptable? Will we be able to stop the machine or know what it bases its intelligence on once it learns more and more by itself? That's a controversial issue that is discussed in many contexts. Will equal access to treatment and will equality in health be enhanced by AI? You could think of programming algorithms that are free of discrimination, for instance. On the other hand, access to AI help may not be evenly distributed in the population. So there are possibilities to use AI to enhance equal treatment, I think. Okay, human intelligence is essential. To which extent is it possible to replace the different types of intelligence used here? Cognitive, collection and analysis of data, for instance. Emotional, to listen, interpret emotions, give support. Legal, to know, interpret, and act according to the rules. Social, to understand the immediate social context, and then more broadly, the ability to use broadly based and flexible judgment when prioritizing. These are increasingly difficult types of intelligence to put on a machine, but maybe. My take on this is machine autism. The machine is probably a high-performing autist. It finds it's intelligent and it's very goal-oriented. It will find increasingly clever ways to reach a focused goal. It is non-discriminatory in decision-making, I think, but it's socially immature. It's narrow-minded. It's unable to read and properly react to the social context. That is machine autism. Now, deep learning promises to solve many problems here. Can it solve these problems? Can deep learning eventually improve the social skills of the machine so that we in the end can achieve high-quality machine healthcare? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Magnus. Very interesting. I think that machine autism is certainly going to stick for a bit. So thank you. Paco, can you please come up, Francisco? I think you'll see how it all really ties together between the ethics, the legality, and now certainly practical application that Paco is working on. So thank you.
First of all, thank you very much. I would like to thank Dr. Lian Colonna for her invitation to be here in this panel. I have a complete different background. I'm a computer engineer. So I'm going to bring this technological view to the problem of privacy preservation. And I'm going to bring also a different approach. We have seen in this conference how AI can bring many privacy and ethical issues, and I'm going to show how AI can be used to preserve privacy, so a complete different approach. As you can see, I'm part of the research group on domotics and ambient intelligence at the University of Alicante, and I'm particularly interested in the use of cameras to monitor all the people at home to support their independent living. And so I'm going to talk about the use of cameras at home and how can we preserve visual privacy using artificial intelligence. So when we think about monitoring of people or objects, cars, etc., in a public space, the main sensor is the camera. We see cameras almost everywhere. If you live in a city as London, you will be catched by a camera around 100 times per day. However, when we move to a private space, the main sensors that are used are binary sensors. These are sensors that say yes or no to different aspects. For instance, is a door open or closed? Is the fridge open? Yes or no? Is the person present in the room? Yes or no? Is the person in bed? Yes or no? So as you can see, these sensors preserve privacy more than a camera, but the information that they provide is quite limited. So our idea is, can we use cameras at home to get richer information so that we could provide better services for all the people, while at the same time maintaining their visual privacy? So we've seen recently lots of new cameras in the market that are used in private spaces, but they are quite limited in the services that they offer. So you can connect to them and watch remotely your house, your pet. Maybe you can record some videos. Maybe they do some kind of facial recognition to start the videos, etc. But the services are quite limited. Why is this? So the main issue obviously is privacy preservation, so people do not upset cameras at home. So here you have a figure from several studies about the use of different technologies for assisted living. Here you can see in the top part those technologies, those sensors that are more acceptable by all the people. So emergency buttons, fall sensors, presence sensors, so all these kind of binary sensors that I was showing before. And then in the lower part, those that are more rejected by people. So cameras, microphones, motion sensors in clothes, infrared cameras, etc. So obviously cameras are in the lower part of the figure. However, there is an increasing interest in the use of cameras. So there are a number of regulators, organizations, analyzing the acceptance of CCTV or cameras in care homes. For instance, in 2015, the Care Quality Commission in the UK, they provided some guidelines to relatives to support putting hidden cameras in care homes to monitor their relatives there. That happened after several cases of abuses in care homes in the UK. Recently, the European Innovation Partnership on Active and Healthy Aging published guidelines on privacy preferences for AEL, for active and assisted living. So there is an increasing interest about the use of cameras for in personal homes and also in care homes. So I mentioned before that the current applications of the cameras in the market are quite limited. However, in research, we are developing lots of different services and applications to support all the people at home. So we have using cameras. So we have systems for fall detection and mainly now for prevention, for identification of activities of daily living, for behavior or physiological monitoring, for rehabilitation, to support people with cognitive impairment, for food intake monitoring or social robotics. So the number of services that we could provide if using cameras at home would be, let's say, ethical and privacy was preserved is immense. So we thought, okay, let's try to create some kind of trade-off between privacy preservation and intelligibility of the images so that we could provide some services while at the same time we could offer, let's say, preserve the privacy of the images. So we came with this privacy by context. Maybe legal people had other names for this. So we have on one side the context, that is what describes a particular situation that is being watched with the camera. So here the context comes defined by the identity of the observer, the identity of the observed person, the relationship between both persons, the appearance of the monitored person, if they are naked or dressed, the location in the house, or the event that is happening. So, well, before this, I would like to explain that in many cases, people say, okay, let's process locally all the images so nothing private comes out of the house. But we are thinking on a different completely application so that, for instance, I would like to monitor my mother remotely and see what she's doing, or for instance, if there is a fall, then I could assess the situation, etc. So we need to broadcast those videos remotely. So how can we preserve privacy in those cases? So here we have the context, and then we have developed, that I'm going to show you later, several identification methods in the images. So we are able to detect the person in the image and identify them in different ways. So with these two, the context and the different visualizations, the end user can decide, okay, my mom, for instance, can decide if I fall in the bathroom, my son can see the real video in real time. I don't care if I'm naked. Then, for instance, in a similar context, so my mother falls in the bathroom, the care emergency system, they cannot watch the real image, but they can see some kind of filter image, but they can assess the situation. However, if my mother is watching the TV, I cannot see the image at all. So the context establishes the different visualizations. So here is another explanation about the same thing. So we have the context on the top. We have the subject being monitored that sets the privacy preferences. So according to what is happening at that point, a visualization is provided to the observer. Obviously, this is quite complicated. We are using artificial intelligence at the same time to recognize the context, what is happening in the video, and at the same time to detect where the person is and provide the filters. And the filters that we are considering are these ones. So we can have the original video, we can pixelate the person, only the person. Maybe in the future we can also work with the environment to create some kind of virtual environment to avoid watching the environment. We can blur the person, emboss to just substitute the person by the silhouette or an avatar, or even remove the person from the image. So as you can see, each one of these filters allow seeing the person in a different way, concealing different aspects of the person. So this is what we have here that we grouped into different privacy levels. So the privacy obviously is not protected if we show the original image. The privacy level is low. For instance, the colors, textures, and shapes are distorted with the blurring, pixelation, or embossing. For instance, with the silhouette, we remove the colors and textures. However, the shapes are preserved, so we could assess if a person has fallen down. We can preserve the pose, but we remove all the colors, textures, and shapes using, for instance, the avatar, substituting the person by an avatar. And obviously, the maximum privacy preservation is if we remove the person completely from the image. So just to return, so here you would have from lower privacy preservation to higher privacy preservation in all those filters. And you can see how, for instance, with the silhouette, you don't have the colors, but you have the shape of the person. However, with the avatar, we have just removed the person and substitute the person. We recognize the posture of the person, so we can modify it with an avatar. So here I'm showing some videos of our latest developments. So this is carried out in real time. So we recognize using artificial intelligence where the person is, and we substitute the person with different filters. So this would be what the caregiver would see remotely, according to what is happening in the image. So here you see, for instance, pixelation, blurring, embossing, invisibility, and substitution by an avatar. So here, as you can see, in this case, if something happens there, a caregiver would be able to assess the situation. However, most of the privacy is preserved because you cannot watch the person there. It's just substituted by an avatar. In this case, you can watch the real person there, but you are concealing some of the aspects. Okay, so this would be the different visualizations that we offer, and obviously, then we will recognize what is happening there, and according to the context, we will show to a particular person one visualization. Maybe a different person has different permissions, watches the same video with a different visualization. So all this work is now being carried out in a European project, in a international project funded by the More Years, Better Lives program, and it involves the University of Alicante, the Polytechnic University delle Marche in Italy, and the University of Toronto. We are the technological partners. Then we have psychologists and social scientists from Aachen University in Germany, and then we have people with legal background from the University of Stockholm. So it's quite a good interdisciplinary consortium to deal with all the aspects that involve the use, in this case, of live logging technology. So live logging is all these technologies that allow you to monitor someone continuously, from cameras to smartwatches, mobile phones, any other kind of sensors. So we are studying the acceptability of these services by older and frail people. And just to finalize, here I wanted to show some of our publications. We are in the middle of our project, so it's a 3-year project, so we are just in the middle of the project, but here you can see some of our publications. So we have more legal publications, more related to the legal and regulatory challenges. more social aspects about the benefits and barriers of using live logging technologies by all the people, or more technological publications. So if you want to get some more information about the project or track our publications, so you have the website there. The URL. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Paco. Very interesting application of computer vision. So thank you very much, panelists. I would like now to open it up to any questions. There are microphones in the middle of the room, so please come to the microphone.
So, thank you for this extremely revealing workshop, and I think it was very interesting. And the revealing part already started at Barbara's sheets, because she had a very nice sheet of fundamental ethical principles. And later on in the presentation, a sheet of data sharing principles. And I couldn't correlate those two. Those were far away, and there was no way to see how those data sharing principles related to the ethical principles. And that's a line that continued all through the workshop. And the last presentation really pointed me to a really nice example of how that works in practice. In the Netherlands, there had been an experiment in an elderly home with exactly that kind of privacy-preserving cameras. And it resulted in a giant riot inside the elderly home. They were really kicked out of the elderly home, those cameras, because the elderly home couldn't explain what the relation between the cameras and the privacy-preserving aspects and those fundamental rights was. So that's a very interesting case. And my question to the panelists is, how do we bridge that gap? Or do we have at all a conceptual framework to translate those fundamental rights into conceptualization of privacy or into data sharing principles or principles like that? So how do we bridge the gap? And can we?
Yes, thank you for bringing up a very apt question. You're right, there isn't. When we talk about the word ethics is used quite loosely. So the data mining ethics, and I did mention that it's more legal than it is actually ethical. You've put your finger on the problem. Often when we talk about ethical, we mean legal. And there are people that purport to have ethical frameworks, and I review some of these things, and it's not the way I would understand ethics. So there is a great many understandings of ethics, because it is not a prescriptive thing like the law, and it is not, as my colleague here will tell you, law is reactive, ethics is proactive. But you're absolutely correct. And how do we do that? By working together, and that's maybe, I don't want to be flippant about it, but by working together and trying to understand what we mean when we say ethics, what we mean when we say laws, what we mean when we say surveillance, and all the rest of it. And yes, there's a lot to do. But I would like to say that I haven't seen many medics or clinicians in this conference. Perhaps you're hidden somewhere, health economists. I think the team has to be broader than computer scientists, legal people and ethicists. It's got to be a lot broader than that, so we understand each other's languages. And that's just in one language. Then we interpret into other languages. I'm multilingual, so I know that interpretations can vary in the translation. But thank you for your excellent question.
Cecilia?
Just a brief remark. I find it very relevant also. What is missing in our discussion, and possibly generally in the conference, has to do with information security. It strikes me that there is quite a lot of discussions about privacy from a human rights perspective, digital single market as well. But what about information security in this context? Confidentiality, integrity, availability, non-repudiation, and all that. And that's a field where we, from a legal point of view, has had to contribute to the bridging of the gap between different professional profiles. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Victor, and I work at Mozilla on a machine learning team where we work under tight privacy constraints. My question is about public health systems that might use machine learning and large public health data sets. I'm not aware of any kind of regulations or constraints so that those systems that are built to provide healthcare suggestions for patients, I'm interested in knowing, is there any regulation to make those data sets and that code available back to the public so that people can be assured that the data is being used responsibly and that those models are actually representative of the general population as a whole?
I'm not aware of any, but this similar question came up in an earlier workshop, earlier in this conference. Maybe someone in the audience is aware of it, but I think you're right. I mean, blockchain is offering that, or at least they're saying that they will offer that, but I'm not a computer expert, so I'm turn over to Paco.
Yeah, I mean, and I can say, you know, in my field as well, I come across that all the time. What are the data sets that we can use? And this goes back to actually another question we were, you know, discussing the other day around how do you pull out all of the information necessary from these legacy systems that are in the healthcare. So I don't know if maybe, Cecilia, you have a point of view on that.
It's a critical factor, no doubt, and what strikes me is that quite often there is so much enthusiasm when it comes to AI-based methods, and what about the legacy in terms of complicated, complex system structures that are not really, that are becoming more and more dysfunctional. So it is an open but very relevant question.
My short comment on that is, well, you have to distinguish. One field is whether there is any regulation about getting access to data, but I understand the question was more about getting access to the code whereby the data is processed. And there is no privacy issue, really, I think, unless that code contains information on individuals. But there is, in many countries, we have to make accessible any information used by authorities for decision making. So in the context of authorities, we have some regulation that you might use in order to request that type of information. I don't know of any example of it being done, although within research we are trying to build data sharing, or rather code sharing facilities that will be able to share code between researchers. And there is no reason why those shouldn't be open to the public as well. You just have to understand them, I guess. That's the main obstacle.
A very brief comment. In terms of regulatory framework, there are, generally speaking, various conditions, or different conditions between what goes on in the public sector of society as opposed to the private sector. And in spite of saying that no, it's difficult to find applicable solutions, one challenge is that there might be too many rules that are applicable but not necessarily customized to what you were referring to.
Yeah, in my case, I would need to train my systems, for instance, a system for fall detection with massive amounts of videos of people falling or not falling under real circumstances. That's almost impossible to get because there are some studies in which they put cameras for 6 months in care homes, and in 6 months of videos, they got 4 falls. You cannot train a system with this amount of data. So it's almost impossible to get enough data to work with video, to train video systems, intelligent, using machine learning. And at the same time, you need to consider all the privacy issues related obtaining those videos in the data sets and trying to make those videos public. So it's, from my point of view, it's quite difficult to be able to train these systems using computer vision to provide all these services. Imagine behavioral monitoring. So imagine getting thousands of hours of videos of all the people living normally at home and trying to tag that. How do you store that? Is privacy of the people being recorded affected, etc.? So it's for us, it's a huge problem, and we would like to have some kind of also guidelines or regulations to be able to capture these data sets.
So I know we just have a few more moments. I think it would be good if everyone, I have a question and you can either answer the question or kind of, make your final comments, but we heard a lot about education and educating people on the benefits and also potential repercussions of opting in, especially in vulnerable states. So any point of view on how we can educate or any closing remark that you'd like to state?
I think it's imperative that we start thinking about education at the primary level. Yesterday I was speaking to someone who said that, we have sex education at very, very early years. Together with that should be, I think it was Joe, should be ethics education, and how we start and understanding what technology is out there, what it's doing to us, what it's doing with our data, what it's doing for us, what it could potentially be doing against us.
Thank you. Cecilia?
Yes, of course, it's important with education, and there is, I would say, a need for IT law for IT law for IT professionals and vice versa, and new generations becoming tech users is not necessarily equivalent to having the capacity to question, to be digital. I mean, we talk about the digital divide, and I think that's a principle that we need to investigate much further into. Digital divide has much more to do with modern society than merely having access to the internet. It's understanding and being able, having the tools to claim your rights.
Magnus, any final comments?
Just very shortly, as always, you would need to encourage cross-disciplinary training of legal professionals in science and in the development of technical systems, and the other way around. There is always a gap between specialties that need to be bridged, I think, in terms of education of the people who are trying to develop these systems. I think that is essential but very hard to accomplish.
Well, not only this cross-disciplinary training, but I think it's very important to have this tight collaboration between the different disciplines. I'm learning a lot about ethical aspects and legal aspects in this multidisciplinary project. I don't see so many international projects in which all the disciplines are combined together and working together to get in a particular direction. And I think it's very important to have this transdisciplinary collaboration, just to know each other more, to know which each discipline needs, and to try to create a common vocabulary because we don't understand each other. So I come to the first meeting in the project and I couldn't understand at all what the legal person was saying or the people expert on ethics was saying. So I think we need all this collaboration.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Paco, that's a great point on common vocabulary. I know when we work on building out solutions in enterprise AI platform, it's really also about breaking up what is the right language across the data scientist, the business owner, the tech owner. And it's really important that that vocabulary is built so we know we're communicating aligned together. Yeah. So I'll give you 3 minutes back to your day. If there are no further questions, thank you very much for attending, and thank you, panelists, for your presentations today.